Wonderful. Hi, Lukas Rieke.
Hey, how you doing, Kath?
Doing great. How are you?
Good.
Can you tell me what you teach and where?
Yes, I teach high school physics and engineering and robotics in Houston, Texas.
Amazing. Okay, so my first question is how important is building a relationship with parents and continually communicating with them?
Hugely important, especially in a world where everything is everything's digital and there's like blurred lines between what is in class work, what is out of class work, what is an appropriate time to communicate, what is an inappropriate time to communicate. Having a regular and clear line of communication with parents just makes everything easier. It also makes it very easy to work as a team when you're addressing a student who might be dropping the ball or might be dealing with outside stressors. It's just almost impossible to tackle that issue with a student when you are one of several teachers with that student and you're only seeing them every so often. The parents have the opportunity to see them outside of class, outside of the school day, every day, all the time, and can be an incredible teammate in tackling some of those issues.
That sounds really important. Kind of relatedly, and I guess you can take this however you want to, can you describe a time you felt challenged by a student and how did you handle that?
I would just a quick question and response. Is this in relation to my relationship with the parent or just in general?
I think in general, whether that's like a student like challenging you in class or like behavioral problems or whatever that you, in whatever way you felt challenged by a student.
Okay, I can think of two kind of categories where you can have behavior issues with students. I can think of a time where I had a student who just would react very emotionally and would go 0 to 100 very quickly. And so working to maintain like a calm in the entire room and like to retain focus, I had to get really creative in handling that student's emotions. And so that looked like occasionally bringing in another teacher who could help deal with a particularly tough day, or again, communicating with the parents so that they knew what was going on in the classroom and what he might be dealing with. And unfortunately, like it never really resolved. I only had the student that 1 year, and then he moved on into upper. He was a freshman when I was teaching him, and I really just ended up mitigating a lot of the time. Another behavioral issue is like just kind of laziness isn't quite the right word, but an apathy to like turning in work and accomplishing things, and so that becomes a problem where you're consistently dealing with kids who are learning and participating, but not crossing the finish line. And so that is really where like that parental relationship and communication can come in to introduce some accountability outside of the classroom setting, but also just being proactive about, you know, I might see this kid for 60 minutes and on the way in, I recognize the opportunity to touch base and say like, hey, have you turned in some of that missing work? And on the way out, reminding them that like, you still have things to do. You still need to finish and trying to pour into them and focus on that skill.
Yeah. But I mean, relatedly, what kinds of positive reinforcements do you apply for classroom management?
Great question. I mean, research has shown that the easiest one is to outwardly and consistently positively affirm good behavior, and isolate and try to minimize any effects of negative behavior. I think something I like to do often is I will trust students who are behaving positively with certain tasks that kind of alleviate their present load. And so anytime I get the opportunity to involve a student in some kind of classroom activity, I will choose the kids who I've been positively praising to participate, because I think every student has an inclination to want to be included in different ways. You've got students who have no desire to be in front of class, and so trying to get them included in ways that are meaningful to them is a bit of a challenge. But that what's the word? The diversity isn't the right word, but I can't think of the word, where you mix things up depending on the needs of your individual learners. There's a word for that I can't think of, but I think that goes for positive reinforcement as well. It's figuring out how to positively reinforce kids in ways that matter to them.
Yeah. So with that, it sounds like you have to really know your students and their needs and the things they like and don't like. What tools do you utilize for getting to know your students?
One of the things I'll do is very early in the year, I'll give everybody, I don't give it, it's a requirement. I require students to participate in some form in front of class. And so typically I'll do it in a non-academic setting and in an academic setting as soon as possible. I'll do some kind of get to know you activity where they have to get up and talk about themselves. And that's very simple, not related to conceptual content at all. And then I'll do another one where they do need to represent some understanding of the content of the course in front of their friends or their peers. And that'll give me a real quick read on which kids are comfortable with it, which kids are uncomfortable with it, which kids, I mean, it's really a kind of a quadrant. You can have somebody who's uncomfortable, but still kind of enjoys it. And you can be uncomfortable and hate it, or you could be good at it and comfortable and still hate it. And so that'll map that particular task where, like, I mean, it's tried and true, getting kids to represent their knowledge in front of their peers is a helpful assessment for them. But some kids truly hate it. And so identifying some of those small differences and being able to not necessarily put that kid in that really uncomfortable situation, but often is helpful. And I think helps build that relationship with those kids.
Yeah. So once you kind of have an understanding, how do you try to individualize instruction for different students? And like you were saying, mixing things up for different learning styles and things like that.
I think over the course of time, especially like the first part of the year, introducing different forms of demonstrating understanding, but requiring everyone to do them all. And then as you get later into especially like the first quarter, first semester, introducing some agency where students who are more comfortable with one form or another can choose to represent understanding in that way on a particular task. It's difficult in that, like, some things just need to be done a certain way. Like, you need to pass a semester final, and that's probably going to be a pretty standard test. And that's valuable. You have to be able to do that for entry to college or like safety training in different jobs. But in other ways, it can be helpful to empower students to take that agency and choose the type of deliverable that they're most comfortable with or they're most motivated by. And so not everything's perfect, right? As a science teacher, I don't have kids write a lot. And so if a student truly loves to write, there are going to be fewer opportunities to do that in the class. But I think it is important as a teacher to try to maximize those opportunities when they're available and to be able to give those kids those opportunities.
Yeah, that's great. What do you think, maybe even, what do you think your students would say about you? I feel like high schoolers will like tell you, this is what I think.
If you invite it, it comes. It doesn't take long. But I benefit from a school that we do a feedback survey every year. And then I have used that template and kind of created my own version. And I use it every quarter. And so I do have some actual concrete evidence on what my students would say. I think I have gotten evidence showing that my students find that I am easy to go to, that I can be helpful when they're having an issue with a problem, but also that I can be too fast or too quickly paced for some students. That feedback is more current in my current role. I'm teaching an honors and an AP course. My previous job, I wasn't doing that. And so I feel that that feedback is almost an affirmation to the pace that I'm trying to set for these courses. I think it should be challenging. I know that I've also received feedback that my feedback is not strong. That's one of my weaker areas as a teacher, is the feedback loop, which, again, research has shown is one of the most important things for learning. And unfortunately, it's still an area of growth for me. But I also know that my students enjoy the environment I create, which is one of those things that you carve out as you kind of feel out the students and get to know them and build that relationship. And then you can equip them and empower them to kind of be themselves within the environment that you want.
Yeah. So you said that students feel like they can go to you with questions. What are the tools you utilize to be accessible to students?
I'm pretty big on email communication, especially today. I think that's a valuable life skill, and everybody has technology. Kids have cell phones or devices they can use. And so I'm very clear about my work hours, and I'm also very clear about my response, like the expectations for my responsiveness. And so if they want a response, I'm not going to be responding after like mid-afternoon, evening, especially on weekdays where I'm done with work. And so I'm not going to respond. But I'm also very clear about when I'm available. And so 7:30 in the morning, I am available, both physically and electronically. And so that's a big part of it. Something else that I'll do is that my teaching style is very kind of stop and go in the sense that kids are expected to have their focus on me and the front of the classroom when during certain moments, and then they are released into an activity or a task, and that's back and forth throughout the period. And so that's a very practice thing that we do. And what I then communicate to kids is that if our high school has like a study hour that is kind of sporadically scheduled, so different students have different study hours. And what I've told them is they're welcome to come join a class that I'm actively teaching, with the understanding that when I'm pushing the kids out away from the center of attention into like a task, I'm going to be available to help them first, but I also can be available to help students who are coming in. And so that is, again, a very clear expectation that I think students appreciate. They know that they can come in and get help at that time if they need it, but also they know that the priority are the students that are present in that class. But oftentimes I have time to help them with a problem or a question. And so I think it's important to create and kind of carve out very defined opportunities where they can reach you, and then be consistent about participating in those.
Yeah, that's great. Do students actually take you up on that and come into classes?
They do. And I even then have to deal with some issues, right? You got a student who comes in and has a great friend in that class, and now the two of them are off task because they didn't see each other earlier. And so that just becomes those one-on-one conversations where you offer kind of gentle correction on, you can come in for help and I would like you to, but if you come in and you're going to detract from a present student's current classroom experience, like I'm not going to let you come in. And so that's something as you experience it, as you see it, you recognize it more and more quickly, and you can address it more and more quickly. And then some other issues I've had is that, like, if you've got a student who's really struggling, popping in for a quick question or coming by before the school day starts really isn't enough time to address some of the bigger issues. And so I'm a big proponent of, like, Google Calendar is what we use, but really any kind of electronic shared calendaring system, because I'll commit time slots to kids. Like, if you really, so we just actually, we're pretty early in the school year. We're about a week after our first real assessment, and I have had 2 to 3 students who truly struggled with this first unit we're covering. And so we have had to schedule extended time where I'll take, like, we'll spend the whole 45-minute lunch, or I'll get to school a little bit earlier if they're available to meet in the morning, and we'll dedicate 30, 45, 60 minutes to addressing maybe some misconceptions or some struggles where, like, a 2 or 3 minute pop-in question is not enough time to address it.
Right. That's great. Sounds like there's clear boundaries and clear openness.
Now, I would say it took time to get there.
I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you make sure that there's equal opportunity for accessibility for each student, whether they have limited English fluency or other things that make it difficult for them to learn?
That's a great question. I don't deal with a lot of it in my current context. We're a one-to-one school where the students have a pretty good amount of support when they have those learning differences. But in my previous job, it was one-to-one in a similar way. And we had a bevy of electronic tools that would try to bridge those gaps. And so I would require students even to utilize a translation, or I would look for resources that were, like, fully supported in multiple languages. And then when necessary, this was, again, kind of one of those things that you recognize something that's not as good as it could be, and then address it the next time you get the opportunity to. I would invite some of those language specialists to come help me. And so if I had something coming up where we were addressing, I teach physics, so a lot of it's math, but if we're getting into the reading and the logic that is involved in identifying how to solve a problem, as the year progresses, you get into more and more complex situations. And so I would invite in some of those like ESL or second language learning, like, support teachers to come be present in the activity and help me with those students, because that is not a strength of mine.
Right. And were those already provided by your school? Like, they were already there, you just have to invite them?
Yes. So the school I worked at before this one, we had 2 teachers whose, like, full-time role on campus was to support students who were learning English as their second language. And that's because I want to say, out of the, like, 2,000 or so students that were on campus, it was, like, a significant population were in that group. And so the district had identified that and had staffed that position. That's
great. Good to have those.
It was really helpful.
So what kind of instructional strategies do you regularly utilize in class? You said, like, having instructional time, talking from the front, and then breaking into things? Are there other strategies you use?
Yeah, so my day-to-day is an interactive slide deck called Pear Deck, which is a Google Slides extension. And I'll use that for maybe as little as 10 minutes or as much as 60 minutes in a class period, to go over concepts and practice problems and address misconceptions. And it's, again, it's a Google Slides extension where I can create the slide deck, add Pear Deck, and then it adds interactivity where students participate and they respond to things and they can ask questions, and I can address all those things through class. So that's like I won't say every day, but almost every single class day, I'm using Google Slides and Pear Deck to some degree. And so that involves the in and out is where like I will put a practice problem on the board or maybe like a general misconception and I'll address it. And then I send the kids out and I'll change the screen to a timer and say, they can still see the slides on their screen and say, here's like a practice problem I want you to practice, maybe work with a neighbor, work with a group of three, something, maybe work on your own. And I'll give them 3 to 5 minutes and then I bring them back and we go over the problem together and address any questions. And so that in and out is a very regular thing in my physics classes. Obviously, we still do labs. Just Friday, we completed a lab that took the entire period. And so we didn't use a Pear Deck. I just had a Google Doc that they made a copy of and we worked through the instructions together from there. I like to do work where they are working with a partner and then shuffling. That's like often how I'm structuring different activities. And so I use a tool called Flippity, where it'll randomize groups, your student groups, and it'll make them random. And then in the engineering class, where engineering and robotics, we do a lot of all the units are paced in such a way that they start very individual and they're learning and kind of going through tutorials. And then the next section, they do a few activities where they're paired up and there's 2 people that are kind of working together to come up with something. And then the end of the unit, they're groups of 3 or 4 and tackling some kind of challenge that has them address, or not address, but has them utilize the learning that they learned earlier in the unit. And so there are 4 or 5 units in that course and they're all modeled after that same progression. And so that also is where I'll use Flippity to kind of create groups and structure within the activity.
That sounds really like it's using a pretty diverse set of skills and goes back to like the different learning techniques and things. What do you consider when you're setting expectations? Maybe it's at the beginning of the year when you're setting like classroom behavioral expectations, or when you're setting like, today we are going to be expected to learn this. What do you consider when you're setting those?
So I'll go the second part of the question first. I have a learning objective. That's not the most student friendly term, but there is like I think often I call them core concepts or maybe like a focus point where I will identify like a singular thing that I want them to be able to learn by the end. And I don't always use exit tickets, but if I have an exit ticket of some sort, it's addressing that core concept or that focus point. And that's especially in physics. That is almost a daily occurrence in physics, is I've got something that we're addressing. So the content is all grouped by module, and each module has a central idea, and I want to know if they learned on that central idea. And so that is very clearly communicated and is consistent. I think those are the 2 keys in day-to-day or bigger classroom settings, is that you have a clear objective isn't quite the right word, but expectation or something like that. You're consistent and you're addressing and upholding of it. And then in the greater sense of the classroom, I've tried lots of different things. I think it's important to me to get the kids working together and talking to each other. Some research has shown that if you're learning things from a peer, you're going to remember it better than if you're learning it from the teacher. And if you're doing both, it's just more helpful. And so a lot of times they're getting introductory and practice things from me. And then when they have specific questions, they're working with a friend. And I'm hoping that opportunity to learn from a friend on like, why isn't this equation working when I use it? And their friend helps them find the error, that's what's really being converted into long-term memory. And so I try to do a lot of structural things to create those moments. Like I have kids that they have a place where they put their cell phones that's like very visible and central. So there's a safety there where like their phones are out in the open. And so like you can tell nobody's really messed with them or not. but also they're not with them. They don't have their phones to distract them or alleviate maybe an uncomfortable situation where they can distract themselves. Something else I do is that like I don't have many kind of core values, but respect is like easily the one that I bring up the most. Because if you're respectful to another person in class or to me in your communication, that's important, that's valuable. If you're respectful of each other's time and effort, that's important and valuable. I think a lot of those, because it is like very much structured around the relationship of like, we are working together and you are working together to help each other learn. Like we have to be working from a basis of respect at all times. And so then addressing those things as soon as I catch them, right? If a student is wasting another student's time or effort by not also joining them in the work, or if they're saying something that's disrespectful or unkind, addressing those as soon as possible. And then I also think it's important, just as a general teaching note, is to practice valuable things without content in them early. And so, for example, I, again, really value the kids working together. And so we did a couple activities at the beginning of the year that had nothing to do with physics, just so they could practice working together and get that the point is not that you learn how to build this thing out of Legos or how to make a chocolate chip cookie, but that you learn how to work together so that when I ask you to do physics, you'll know how to do it and how I want you to do it. So
that's incredible. And so kind of going off of that with like expectations of respect, how do you set up clear expectations of treatment of others and then enforce it when there comes up with an issue with harassment or racism or sexism in your class? What do you do?
In a lot of ways, I'm very lucky to teach the older kids in high school. I don't have to really like demonstrate and educate like on what respect or other like respectful type of things are. Like it's a shared understanding that we have pretty much from jump. And so that is a blessing. I do just on like day one, when I'm kind of outlining some of the ways I want class to be, I will, throw up some kind of funny examples to kind of break the ice. And as a part of it, another get to know you activity where I kind of get them up in front of each other. I talk about ways to be respectful when someone is sharing about themselves or when they're giving effort and, presenting or doing something similar. And so those early activities are opportunities to highlight, like, this is a respectful thing to do. You listen. You close your laptop or your device, you paying attention, you applaud if they've done something they might be uncomfortable with or they went outside their comfort zone. And so those are opportunities to highlight what that activity looks like. But then addressing it in the moment is much more important because you might have dozens of kids in your room, all making noise and conversing and working. And so being proactively present in as many spaces as possible, as often as possible, because you can't be in multiple places at once, but you can kind of tour and, bring your auditory focus into different situations and kind of rotate yourself and try to be present as much as possible, which is a difficult task. But just catching those moments and making sure that as many people as possible, like, notice that you catch them. I think it's very important to draw a line outwardly and publicly to some degree, and then address the issue personally and privately. Mm-hmm. And so if I've got a student who's doing something disrespectful, I will outwardly address, like, hey, that's not okay. Like, I need you to stop that. Mm-hmm. And then that's all I need to do. I need everybody to know that, like, there's a line there. You can't cross that line. And later I will pull that student aside, as soon as possible, but sometimes it can be a couple of days even before you get the opportunity to, and just try to figure out, like, what was that about? Are you having a bad day? Like, you going through something? Do you and that student like have a bad history? Is there some issues here? A lot of times, especially the thing that's coming to my mind right now that happened a few weeks ago, there's just a couple of boys that like have a history of goofing off a little too much, and then they set off one of their tempers. And so, like, I quickly learned that you two have a history and you love hanging out and goofing off, and sometimes it gets out of hand. And so I'm just not going to pair you often. Like, I just can't put you in that situation. And so that wasn't like neither of them were having a bad day or going through something tough. They just have a history there, and they're good friends, and they push each other's buttons. Mm-hmm. And so managing some of that, you can't do that in front of everybody in the moment. Like, you can't pause and say, like, what's wrong with you? What's going on? What's, like, is your day okay? That's not a public thing. That's a private thing. And so I don't remember if that fully answers your question.
Yeah, no,
that was the
great
example that came to mind.
That's great. So, it's like, having a line publicly, and then also the empathy to imagine you might be going through a hard thing. This might not be about what you just said.
Some kids are just hangry or something. Like, it's just like, you never know.
Right. So what signals to you that you might need to change your teaching plan for that day or that week or unit or
That's a
whatever?
great question. Man, oftentimes I'm running into timing issues. For example, this lab we just did last Friday, I've got two classes that are smaller, one class that is full capacity,
Mhm.
and I only have so much equipment. And so the first time I did the lesson was with one of the smaller classes, no problem. And then the big, massive class came the next day and didn't even get close to finishing.
Mhm.
And so that was like, okay, I wondered if this is going to be an issue. It is an issue. We'll just adjust timelines. And the other two classes, again, you need to be equitable to some degree. And so they'll have extra time to work on the lab report. I think it's okay to create more time and have to sacrifice something later. It's not the end of the world. But minute to minute, I have had several moments where like a group of students will really struggle with a concept and I just have to adjust my time. It might be in that very moment where I'll say, okay, like the six of you, I want you to come sit up front with me, and everyone else, here's your next problem. And then we'll go over that, whatever misconception you were dealing with. And I'll just try to either excuse them from that practice problem the other kids are doing, or, you know, you cut your losses as best you can and manage the time as best you can to still try to accomplish the goal of the lesson. But in a bigger sense, if you have, like I can remember, we do some mastery-based philosophies within our assessments, and so there's some iterativeness there. And I had a test where it's across the board, kids were performing poorly on an assessment, and so that to me, we don't have the tools that really pointed out specifically, but it was a glaring enough problem that it didn't take too much effort to figure out what went wrong and where the issue was. But like that particular semester, I just know like we didn't cover everything I hoped to cover because of that issue and the 2 to 3 lessons I had to carve out to address it, because I just had to decide as the teacher, this particular concept was more worthwhile than the 2 that I had to drop because I needed to make time to readdress it.
Right.
And I haven't come up to that just yet. And so I haven't thought this year how I'm going to try to teach it differently, because this is my 4th year teaching this course. And the first 2 years, I didn't have that big of a problem. And so last year, having the kids really struggle with a particular concept, I'm not really sure I'm going to handle it yet, but it's coming up in October.
It's interesting that it changes year by year, even though it's the same lesson. Okay, so you're saying assessments. What types of assessments do you find most effective to really understand where student learning is?
Entirely based on the content. So I get to teach 2 very different courses. I get a physics course and an engineering and robotics course. And in physics, it's all math and logic and story problems and understanding the context of the problem and then applying the right math to get your answer. And so that's almost all the assessments I do are that. And so the mastery-based philosophy comes in where they take an assessment once, and if they don't reach a certain level of success, a certain level of mastery, there are activities they can do to earn another opportunity within a time frame to try to demonstrate a higher level of mastery on those concepts. And so that is there's not a lot of variety there, and unfortunately, I think that's more to do with physics. And so I don't try to fight that, because I think physics is just a certain type of concepts. There's only a certain way you can do it. Now there is some skills-based assessments in physics that are lab-based and kind of procedural and understanding the scientific method within the realm of physics. And that is a part of it, but it is a lower part from a percentage standpoint than the very literal like concept application type assessment. In robotics, it's much more project-based and progression-based, and the students are measured from basically where they started to where they get to. It's not so much like, can you do this problem? It's can you apply the engineering process to create a solution and demonstrate that you are learning as you're iterating. And so that is very different. And a lot of that is much more about what the students are representing to me in their reflections. Because I can have 2 students who come up with 2 solutions, and it's very obvious that one is better than the other. But if that first student who created the better solution started with a good idea to begin with and only made it a little bit better, that's different than the other student who really had no awareness or understanding of the problem to begin with and has come a long way to come up with a solution. Right. And both of those growths will be present in their reflections and how they talk about what they learned. And so, I mean, obviously the students don't know that because it's not the emphasis of the course. The emphasis of the course is robotics, but I'm evaluating and I do make a point to emphasize that, like, this is what I want to see the most. This is what I care about the most, is your reflections. But that's truly where I'm measuring their learning.
That's really interesting. How do you keep learning about physics? Like, as you're teaching it, how are you continuing to grow in this subject?
It's hard, and it's not my favorite part of the job.
Mm-hmm.
I think I have an engineering background, and so mechanical physics is still very easy for me because I have so much background in that. But as a physics teacher, I teach mechanical physics and then electrical physics, and electrical physics is not my strength. And so every year I find myself trying to, I mean, YouTube and Khan Academy are big for me for some of that more conceptual stuff where you're just applying logic and math to solve a problem. But I'll tell you, again, this is my 4th year teaching this particular physics course at this school. And every year, like, especially the labs for the electronic side of physics have gotten better and better and better, because I truly started with almost nothing. And it's difficult because it feels like it's not as worth my time when I feel like my job is to be a teacher and to invest in the students, and to invest in my own understanding of the content feels like a lower priority. But again, I've leaned on YouTube. I got to go to a national conference this last spring. And so that was very helpful. I got to connect with some other physics teachers, and I really was seeking out, like, how do you cover, like, atomic electricity or magnetism? Because that's really just not a strength for me. But I would say that I think, like, electronic resources and groups, I've had some people recommend, like, Facebook groups or other, like, message board type settings. But I really haven't benefited from those much in the last few years. But I know that I've had coworkers that really, like, swear by that and talk about how helpful those have been. So that's another option.
Great. Well, the last question is a little bit related. When teaching is a particular challenge, where do you go for support, encouragement, or problem solving?
That's a great question. I am blessed to have several really encouraging and, like, quality coworkers who, like, if nothing else, can just kind of encourage me and affirm me when I'm struggling with something. I have one in particular that I just happen to be close with because of shared things outside of the classroom, you know, kind of life season and some of those things, who is especially supportive. And then we also have a director of curriculum on campus. It's kind of like, in my previous job, it would have been like assistant principal of education or something like that. And she is obviously busy. She's helping lots of teachers, but she's someone that if I really am having a curriculum issue or a pedagogy issue or like a student behavior issue that isn't really, I guess, you know, occasionally you have some of those behavior issues that are academic and not more outside the classroom. She is someone that, like, she has a rhythm where you can schedule time with her and she can dedicate time to working with you on a specific problem. And I have taken advantage of that resource a couple of times. She was one who really helped me in my second year to come up with a better way to explore magnetism, because I truly just, and she doesn't have any background in physics, but she was looking the same places I was looking, researching YouTube and other physics resources and Wikipedia just to try to find what other teachers are doing. And so she dedicated some time and helped me brainstorm and kind of reflect on what was working well and what wasn't. And then in my first job, the district was bigger, the school was bigger. And so they had a mentor teacher kind of infrastructure. And so my first year there, I had someone directly assigned to me that I met with like every 4 or 5 weeks, who was very encouraging, was helping me solve problems. Like, this kid can, you know, continue acting out. How do I help the kid and also not have it ripple across all the other kids? And then those teachers are resources then even after that year. So he was assigned to me that year, but then my second year there, I also could go to him when I had questions and help. And so that was a really helpful resource as well.
Right. That's great. Thank you for your time. Anything else you want to say to end, or you feel like that's
just happy for you. Happy you're on this journey. It's exciting.
Thanks. I'm going to stop the recording now.